waste is an inevitable byproduct of nearly every industry, whether it is food production, automotive manufacturing, or construction. Therefore, it is paramount to think in advance about how to manage it. Of course, when radioactive materials are involved, the waste becomes especially hazardous and poses unique challenges for disposal and management. Today we are here with Andrea to better understand what nuclear waste is and what we do with it.
Yes, Elena, indeed. Nuclear waste is one of the biggest challenges our society is facing when dealing with nuclear energy, but it can be managed. Although radioactive waste is commonly associated with the production of electricity by nuclear power plants, it can actually be generated in various non-power related settings, including medical facilities, mining operations, and industrial processes like oil and gas exploration. Even everyday items, such as smoke detectors and exit signs, can produce radioactive waste because they contain small amounts of radioactive materials.
It is important to consider that radioactive waste could have different features and could be produced in different amounts. The type and quantities of radionuclides contained within can have a significant impact on the waste behavior and risks. Indeed, while some radionuclides may decay and become stable relatively quickly, namely the short-lived ones, others, the long-lived ones, can remain radioactive for many decades or even centuries. All states that engage in any kind of nuclear application must consider the management of radioactive waste and make sure it is addressed in a safe manner in compliance with national regulations, most often based on or in harmony with safety standards of the International Atomic Energy Agency.
To effectively manage this complex waste stream, it is classified by each country into various categories based on its level of radioactivity and on the time it takes for the radioactivity to decay. By categorizing the waste, national authorities can determine the most appropriate methods for managing it. The IAEA has established a classification system that provides standardized framework for managing nuclear waste, from which countries can take inspiration. The system is organized in 6 classes, each of them having different requirements for handling, storage, and disposal.
Exempt waste has such a low content of radionuclides that their radiological impact is negligible and thus meets the criteria for clearance, exemption, or exclusion from regulatory control for radiation protection purposes. Very short-lived waste is typically generated by hospitals and research institutions and contains small amounts of mostly short-lived radionuclides. Such waste can be stored for decay for a few years. Afterwards, it can be cleared from regulatory control in accordance with arrangements approved by the regulatory body for uncontrolled disposal, use, or discharge.
Very low-level waste typically includes soil and rubble with low levels of activity concentration and a very limited concentration of longer-lived radionuclides. It does not require a high level of containment and isolation. Low-level waste covers a very broad range of waste. It may include short-lived radionuclides at higher levels of activity concentration or long-lived radionuclides with relatively low levels of activity concentration. It requires robust isolation and containment for periods up to a few hundred years.
Intermediate-level waste, which comes from nuclear power plants and other facilities, contains long-lived radionuclides, such as alpha-emitting radionuclides, and requires a greater degree of containment and isolation. High-level waste, mainly comes from nuclear power plants, typically contains high activity concentrations of both short and long-lived radionuclides, able to generate significant quantities of it by radioactive decay for centuries. This kind of waste requires cooling and shielding and the most stringent safety measures.
According to data collected by the IAEA, in terms of overall volume, about 95% of existing radioactive waste is very low or low level. However, in terms of total radioactivity, intermediate and high-level waste account for more than 95% of the total radioactivity of produced waste.
Despite the hazard posed by different types of radioactive waste, proper management practices enable us to mitigate risks and protect our well-being and the environment in the long run.